The dust on her father's boots was the last thing Felicity Turner saw before the door slammed shut, and she stood alone on the dirt road leading away from the only home she had ever known, with nothing but a carpet bag and the life growing inside her. The August heat of 1882 pressed down on Yerington, Nevada like a weight, and Felicity pressed her hand to her stomach as she watched the ranch house fade into the distance, her mother's sobs still echoing in her ears, even though the sound had long since disappeared. She was 20 years old, unmarried and pregnant with the child of a man who had promised her everything, and then vanished like smoke when she told him the news 3 weeks ago. Her father had given her until sunrise to leave, and her mother had pressed $2 into her hand with trembling fingers before turning away, unable to meet her eyes. The shame had been too much for them to bear. She knew that, but it did not make the abandonment hurt any less as she stood there in the middle of the road with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Felicity walked toward town with the sun beating down on her back, her feet stirring up small clouds of dust with each step. The main street of Yerington was quiet at this early hour, most of the respectable folk still inside having breakfast, and she was grateful for that small mercy. She passed the general store, the saloon, the church where she had attended services every Sunday since she was a child, and felt the weight of what she had lost settling over her like a funeral shroud. Her reputation was destroyed, her family had disowned her, and she had no skills beyond cooking and sewing that might earn her enough money to survive. The boarding house would not take her once they learned of her condition, and no respectable family would hire a fallen woman to work in their home. She sat down on a bench outside the feed store and tried to think of what to do next. Her hands were shaking, and she realized she had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. The $2 her mother had given her would not last long, and then what? She closed her eyes and fought back tears, refusing to cry in public where anyone might see her shame displayed so openly. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep and gentle, and Felicity opened her eyes to find a man standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, his boots dusty from the trail, and there was genuine concern in his expression as he looked at her. "I am fine, thank you," Felicity said, trying to compose herself. "Just resting for a moment." The man studied her for a long moment, and she saw his gaze take in her carpet bag, her dusty dress, the exhaustion that must have been written all over her face. "You look like you could use some breakfast. There is a cafe just down the street that serves a decent meal. Would you allow me to buy you something to eat?" Felicity knew she should refuse, should maintain what little dignity she had left, but her stomach was empty and her situation was desperate. "I could not impose on your kindness," she said weakly. "It would be no imposition," the man said. "My name is Samuel Matthews. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town, and I came in this morning to pick up some supplies. I would be glad of the company if you would join me." There was something honest in his face, something decent that made Felicity nod slowly. "My name is Felicity Turner, and I would be grateful for a meal, thank you." The cafe was small and clean, with checkered curtains on the windows and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. Samuel Matthews ordered eggs and bacon and biscuits for both of them, and Felicity tried not to eat too quickly, tried not to show how desperately hungry she was. He did not press her with questions, just made polite conversation about the weather and the state of the cattle market, giving her time to collect herself. "Miss Turner," he said finally, when their plates were nearly empty, "I do not mean to pry into your affairs, but it seems to me that you might be in some difficulty. If there is any way I can help, I would be honored to do so." Felicity set down her fork and looked at this stranger who had shown her more kindness in an hour than her own family had shown her in the past month. "I am beyond help, I fear, but I thank you for your concern." "No one is beyond help," Samuel said quietly. "I have been where you are, feeling like the world has turned against me and there is no way forward. It is a lonely place to be." She met his eyes and saw understanding there, not judgment, and something inside her cracked open. "My family has cast me out. I am with child and the father has abandoned me. I have nowhere to go and no way to support myself. There, now you know my shame." Samuel did not flinch or look away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "That is a difficult situation," he said finally. "But it is not insurmountable. A child is not a shame, Miss Turner. A child is a blessing, regardless of the circumstances of its conception." "Society does not see it that way," Felicity said bitterly. "A woman in my position has few options and none of them are pleasant." "Then perhaps you need to find a different position," Samuel said. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts, and then continued. "Miss Turner, what I am about to propose may seem strange, but I ask you to hear me out. I am a widower. My wife died 3 years ago of pneumonia, and I have lived alone on my ranch since then. It is a good piece of land with a solid house and enough cattle to provide a comfortable living. I am in need of a wife, and you are in need of a home and a name for your child. If you would consent to marry me, I would give you both of those things." Felicity stared at him in shock. "You do not even know me. Why would you make such an offer?" "Because I remember what it is like to be alone and afraid," Samuel said simply. "Because I believe that people should help each other when they can. Because I have room in my life and my home for you and your child, if you are willing to accept my offer. I am not asking for a love match, Miss Turner. I am offering you a practical arrangement that would benefit us both. You would have security and protection, and I would have a companion and someone to help run the household. In time, perhaps we might become friends, and your child would have my name and my protection, which is more than he or she would have otherwise." It was the most extraordinary thing anyone had ever said to her. Felicity felt tears welling up in her eyes and she blinked them back fiercely. "I do not know what to say. This is too generous." "Say yes," Samuel said. "Or at least say you will think about it. I can put you up at the boarding house for a few days while you consider, give you time to make up your mind without pressure." "The boarding house will not take me once they learn of my condition," Felicity said quietly. "Then you will stay at my ranch," Samuel said firmly. "In the guest room, with complete propriety. You can decide what you want to do from there, with no obligation to accept my proposal if you find it does not suit you." Felicity looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to say. He was offering her everything she needed, asking for nothing in return except companionship. It seemed too good to be true, and yet his eyes were steady and honest, and she found herself wanting to trust him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Truly." Samuel was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Because my wife would have wanted me to," he said finally. "Sarah was the kindest person I ever knew. She always helped people who were in trouble, always saw the best in everyone. When she died, I thought I would never feel anything again except grief and loneliness. But lately, I have been thinking that maybe the best way to honor her memory is to live the way she would have wanted me to live, with compassion, with generosity. So when I saw you sitting on that bench looking so lost, I thought maybe this was my chance to do something good, to help someone the way Sarah would have helped them." Felicity felt something shift inside her chest, some small seed of hope taking root in the barren soil of her despair. "All right," she said softly. "I will come to your ranch, and I will think about your proposal." Samuel's face broke into a smile, and Felicity realized he was handsome when he smiled, the sternness leaving his features and revealing something warmer underneath. "That is all I ask. Let me get my supplies loaded up, and then we will head out. It is a beautiful drive, and you will like the ranch. It is peaceful there." The ride out to Samuel's ranch took them through rolling hills covered in sagebrush and scattered juniper trees, with the mountains rising purple and majestic in the distance. The land was harsh and beautiful at the same time, and Felicity found herself relaxing slightly as they left town behind. Samuel kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the history of the area, and she was grateful for the distraction from her own troubled thoughts. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, a sturdy two-story structure built of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. There was a barn and several outbuildings, corrals with horses grazing peacefully, and everything had an air of being well maintained and cared for. Samuel helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle on her waist, and led her inside. The interior was clean but obviously the domain of a man living alone. The furniture was serviceable but sparse, and there were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors, none of the small touches that made a house a home. Still, it was solid and comfortable, and Felicity felt something inside her unclench slightly at the sight of it. "The guest room is upstairs, first door on the right," Samuel said. "Why don't you go rest for a bit while I unload the wagon? We can talk more at supper." Felicity climbed the stairs and found the guest room to be simple but comfortable, with a good bed and a washstand and a window that looked out over the rolling hills. She set down her carpet bag and sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past few hours. This morning she had been homeless and desperate, and now she was in the home of a stranger who had offered her marriage and safety with no expectation of anything in return. It seemed impossible, and yet here she was. She must have fallen asleep, because when she woke the sun was lower in the sky and there was a knock on her door. "Miss Turner, supper is ready when you are." Felicity washed her face and hands and went downstairs to find Samuel had set the table with bread and cheese and cold meat. Simple fare, but plentiful. They ate together in companionable silence, and afterward he showed her around the rest of the house, pointing out where things were kept and making it clear that she should make herself at home. "I have been thinking about your proposal," Felicity said as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "And I have some questions, if you do not mind answering them." "Ask me anything," Samuel said. "What would you expect from this marriage?" Felicity asked. "You said it would be a practical arrangement, but what does that mean exactly?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "It would mean that you would be my wife in name and in the eyes of the law. You would share my home and my life. In time, I would hope that we might come to care for each other as friends, perhaps even as something more. But I would not force anything on you, Miss Turner. You would have your own room for as long as you wished it. Any deeper intimacy would only come if and when you wanted it, not before." "And my child," Felicity asked softly, "would be mine in every way that matters," Samuel said firmly. "I would claim him or her as my own, give them my name, raise them as my son or daughter. No one would know any different unless you chose to tell them." "Why would you take on another man's child?" Felicity asked, genuinely curious. "Because the child did not ask to be born into these circumstances," Samuel said. "Because a child deserves a father and a home, regardless of who planted the seed. Because I always wanted children with Sarah, but we were not blessed with any before she died, and this might be my only chance to be a father. And because that child is part of you, and if you become my wife, then everything that is yours becomes mine to protect and care for." Felicity felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I do not understand how you can be so kind. You do not know me. I could be a terrible person." "I do not think you are a terrible person," Samuel said gently. "I think you are a young woman who made a mistake and is paying far too high a price for it. I think you are brave and strong to be facing this situation with as much courage as you are showing. And I think that if you give me a chance, I can make you happy. Or at least give you a life where you feel safe and valued." "Yes," Felicity said suddenly, the word coming out before she could second-guess herself. "Yes, I will marry you. If you truly mean what you say, if you will give my child your name and your protection, then I will be your wife." Samuel reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "I truly mean it. Every word. We can go into town tomorrow and speak to the preacher. We will be married by this time next week, and no one will think anything of it except that I have finally found someone to share my life with." They were married 6 days later in the small church in Yarrington, with the preacher and his wife serving as witnesses. Felicity wore a simple blue dress that Samuel had bought for her in town, and he wore his best suit. And when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed her gently on the cheek. It was not a romantic wedding, but it was legal and binding, and when Samuel slipped the gold ring onto her finger, Felicity felt something she had not felt in months: hope. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Felicity took over the running of the household, cooking and cleaning and bringing small touches of comfort to the ranch house. She sewed curtains for the windows and hooked rugs for the floors, and Samuel brought her seeds so she could plant a garden. He was gentle and patient with her, giving her space when she needed it and companionship when she wanted it, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. They talked for hours in the evenings, sitting on the porch or by the fire, and Felicity learned about his life before they met. Samuel had been born in Missouri, had come west with his parents as a young man, and had worked hard to build his ranch from nothing. He had married Sarah when he was 23 and she was 21, and they had been happy together until pneumonia had taken her during a harsh winter. He spoke of her with love, but without the crushing grief that had marked the first years after her death, and Felicity understood that he had made his peace with losing her. In turn, she told him about her own life, about growing up on her father's ranch and the dreams she had once had for her future. She told him about Thomas, the cowboy who had worked for her father and had courted her with sweet words and promises, only to disappear the moment things became complicated. Samuel listened without judgment, and when she cried, he held her and told her that Thomas was a fool who did not deserve her tears. As Felicity's pregnancy progressed and her belly began to swell, Samuel became even more solicitous of her comfort. He insisted she rest in the afternoons, made sure she ate well, and built her a rocking chair so she could sit comfortably by the fire in the evenings. He talked to her belly sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, telling the baby about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when the baby was old enough. It was during one of those moments that Felicity realized she was falling in love with her husband. The realization came quietly, without fanfare or drama. She was sitting by the fire one evening in late October, her hands resting on her swollen belly, and Samuel was reading aloud from a book of poetry. She looked at him in the firelight, at the way his voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the words, at the way his hand rested on the arm of his chair, strong and capable and kind. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how valued and respected. She thought about the way he smiled at her over breakfast, the way he always asked about her day, the way he had given her everything without asking for anything in return. And she realized that somewhere along the way, gratitude had transformed into affection, and affection had deepened into something much more profound. "Samuel," she said softly, interrupting his reading. He looked up, concern immediately flooding his features. "Are you all right? Is it the baby?" "No, I am fine," she said quickly. "I just wanted to tell you something." He set down the book and leaned forward, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" Felicity took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I wanted to thank you for everything you have done for me, for giving me your name and your home, for treating me with such kindness and respect. You saved my life, Samuel. You and this ranch, this life we are building together. I do not know what I did to deserve such generosity, but I am grateful for it every single day." Samuel's expression softened, and he crossed the room to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand in his. "You do not have to thank me, Felicity. Having you here has brought life back into this house. You have made it a home again. I am the one who should be grateful." "I think I am falling in love with you," Felicity said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know that was not part of our agreement, and I am not asking you to feel the same way, but I wanted you to know. You have become so dear to me, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Samuel's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Felicity Matthews, I have been half in love with you since the day I saw you sitting on that bench looking so brave and so lost. I did not want to rush you or make you feel pressured, so I have been trying to be patient. But if you are telling me that you feel the same way, then I can finally tell you what has been in my heart for weeks now. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you are cooking. I love the life we are building together, and I want to build so much more with you if you will have me." Felicity felt joy flooding through her like sunlight. "I will have you, now and always." Samuel stood and gently pulled her to her feet, cradling her face in his hands. "May I kiss you properly?" "As your husband who loves you, please," Felicity whispered. His lips met hers in a kiss that was tender and passionate at the same time, full of all the feelings they had been holding back for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless and smiling. "I think," Samuel said softly, "that we should move your things into my room, our room, if you are ready for that." "I am ready," Felicity said. "I have been ready for longer than I realized." That night, Felicity moved into the master bedroom, and Samuel held her close as they fell asleep together for the first time. It was not about passion or physical desire, though there was some of that too. It was about comfort and companionship and the deep, abiding love that had grown between them like a flower blooming in unexpected soil. The baby came in January during a cold snap that froze the water in the horse troughs and left frost on the windows. Felicity's labor started in the early hours of the morning, and Samuel rode to town to fetch the midwife while his ranch hand stayed with Felicity, keeping her calm and comfortable. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Felicity was sure she could not endure another minute of it. But Samuel held her hand and wiped her face with a cool cloth and told her how strong she was, how proud he was of her, how much he loved her. When the baby finally came just as the sun was setting, it was a boy with a shock of dark hair and a lusty cry that filled the bedroom. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Felicity's arms, and she looked down at her son with a mixture of love and wonder that took her breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered. Samuel looked at the baby with tears streaming down his face, and when he reached out to touch the tiny hand, the baby's fingers immediately curled around his thumb. "He is beautiful. What should we name him?" Felicity had been thinking about this for weeks. I want to name him after you. Samuel Jr., if that is all right with you." Samuel's face crumpled and he buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking. "It is more than all right. It is perfect. Thank you for giving me this gift. Thank you for trusting me with him." "He is yours," Felicity said firmly. "In every way that matters, he is your son. Just as I am your wife. We are a family now." The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings and the intense joy that came from watching a new life grow and thrive. Samuel was a devoted father, walking the floor with little Samuel when he cried in the night, making silly faces to get him to smile, talking to him constantly about everything and nothing. Felicity watched her husband fall completely in love with their son, and her own love for Samuel deepened with every passing day. Spring came to the Nevada hills, bringing wildflowers and warm breezes and new calves in the pastures. Felicity planted her garden and watched it grow, tended her son and watched him grow, and felt herself growing too, into a woman who was stronger and more confident than she had ever been before. The shame and grief that had weighed her down when she first came to the ranch had lifted, replaced by a bone-deep contentment that came from being loved and valued and safe. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with baby Samuel sleeping in her arms, Felicity turned to her husband. "Do you ever regret it, taking me in the way you did?" Samuel looked at her in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. Why would you ask that?" "Because you gave up so much," Felicity said. "You could have found a wife who came to you without complications, without another man's child. You could have had an easier life." "I do not want an easier life," Samuel said firmly. "I want this life, with you and our son. Yes, our son. Not just yours, not just mine. Ours. You have given me more happiness in these past months than I thought I would ever feel again. You have made me whole in a way I did not think was possible after Sarah died. I love you, Felicity. I love our family. And I would not change a single thing about how we came to be together." Felicity leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body next to hers. "I love you too. So much that sometimes it frightens me. I keep thinking I will wake up and discover this was all a dream." "It is not a dream," Samuel said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "It is real. We are real. And we have the rest of our lives to prove it to each other." As the summer progressed, life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Samuel worked the cattle with his hired hands, while Felicity managed the household and cared for their growing son. They made occasional trips into Yarrington for supplies, and Felicity held her head high as they walked through town, Samuel's ring on her finger and their baby in her arms. She saw some of the townspeople whisper and speculate about the timing of the baby's birth and their marriage, but Samuel's presence at her side and his clear devotion to both her and the child silenced most of the gossip. One day in town, Felicity saw her mother across the street. Their eyes met for a long moment, and Felicity saw the longing and regret in her mother's face. For a moment she thought about crossing the street, about trying to bridge the gap that had opened between them. But then she felt Samuel's hand on her back, felt little Samuel squirm in her arms, and she realized she no longer needed her mother's approval or forgiveness. She had built a new family, a better family, and that was enough. She nodded politely to her mother and turned away, and if there were tears in her eyes, they were tears of closure, not grief. That night, as they lay in bed with Samuel's arms around her, Felicity told him what had happened. "I saw my mother today. It was the first time since they cast me out." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "How do you feel about it?" "Sad," Felicity admitted, "but also grateful. If they had not turned me away, I never would have found you. I never would have had this life. So in a strange way, I am thankful for what happened, even though it was painful at the time." Do you want to try to reconcile with them? Samuel asked carefully. I would support you if you did. Felicity thought about it for a long moment. No, not now. Maybe someday if they reach out to me, but I am not going to chase after people who threw me away when I needed them most. You are my family now. You and Samuel Jr., that is enough for me. We are enough for each other, Samuel agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Always. As little Samuel grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Samuel's herd increased, and he hired more hands to help with the work. He built an addition onto the house, adding more bedrooms because, as he told Felicity with a mischievous smile, they were going to need the room for all the brothers and sisters he hoped to give their son. Felicity discovered she was pregnant again in the fall of 1884, and this time there was no fear or shame attached to the news, only joy. Samuel was ecstatic, and little Samuel, now 2 years old, seemed to sense that something exciting was happening, even if he did not understand what it meant. The second baby, a girl they named Sarah after Samuel's first wife, came easily in the spring of 1885. Felicity had worried that Samuel might find it painful to name their daughter after the wife he had lost, but he insisted that it felt right, that it was a way of honoring Sarah's memory while celebrating the new life they had created together. Sarah would have loved you, Samuel told Felicity as they looked down at their sleeping daughter. She would have loved how strong you are, how kind. I think she would be happy knowing that you are the one raising our children in this house, carrying on her legacy of compassion and love. Life continued to unfold in beautiful, ordinary ways. The children grew, the ranch thrived, and Felicity and Samuel's love for each other deepened with each passing year. They had disagreements occasionally, as all couples do, but they always talked through them, always chose to face problems together rather than letting them fester. In the summer of 1887, when little Samuel was 5 and Sarah was 2, Felicity gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named James and John. Samuel was beside himself with joy, running through the house announcing to everyone who would listen that he had 4 children now, 4 beautiful children, and he was the luckiest man in Nevada. The house that had once been so empty and quiet was now filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing, with the smell of Felicity's cooking, and the warmth of a family well loved. Samuel expanded the barn and the corrals, built a new bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and even added a school room to the house so Felicity could teach the children their letters and numbers. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Felicity on a picnic up into the hills, leaving the children in the capable hands of their foreman's wife. They sat on a blanket overlooking the ranch, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. You remember the day we met? Samuel asked, pouring her a glass of lemonade from the jug they had brought. I will never forget it, Felicity said. I was sitting on that bench thinking my life was over, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer. I was not sure you would say yes when I proposed, Samuel admitted. It was such a strange offer to make to a woman I had just met, but something inside me told me it was the right thing to do, that you were meant to be part of my life. I am so glad you listened to that voice, Felicity said, reaching for his hand. You have given me everything, Samuel. A home, a family, love beyond anything I ever dreamed of. You took me in when I was broken and lost, and you helped me become whole again. You gave me just as much, Samuel said seriously. You brought joy back into my life. You gave me children and laughter and a reason to look forward to tomorrow. You made this ranch a home again. We saved each other, Felicity. That is what makes our story so special. They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Felicity rested her head on Samuel's shoulder and thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the girl she had been, frightened and abandoned and desperate. She thought about the man who had offered her his name and his home without knowing anything about her, except that she needed help. And she thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, through all the ordinary moments and extraordinary joys that made up a marriage. "I love you," she said softly, "more than I can ever put into words." "I love you too," Samuel replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that, forever." As the years continued to pass, the children grew into capable, kind young people who were a testament to the love and care their parents had poured into them. Young Samuel, who had been born in such difficult circumstances, but who had never known anything except love and acceptance, grew into a strong young man who helped his father run the ranch. He was gentle with the horses and patient with his younger siblings, and he had his mother's kind heart and his father's steady determination. Sarah became a bright, inquisitive girl who loved to read and spend time in her mother's garden. The twins, James and John, were inseparable and got into all manner of mischief, but they were good boys at heart, always quick to apologize when they caused trouble and eager to help with the work around the ranch. In 1892, when Felicity was 30 years old, she gave birth to their fifth child, another girl they named Clara. Samuel joked that they were going to need an even bigger house at this rate, but Felicity could see the pride and joy in his eyes every time he looked at their growing family. One day in the spring of 1893, there was a knock on the door, and Felicity opened it to find her mother standing on the porch. 11 years had passed since they had last spoken, and in that time her mother had aged considerably, her hair now completely gray, her face lined with the weight of regret. "Hello, Felicity," her mother said quietly. "I know I have no right to be here, but I wanted to see you. To tell you how sorry I am for what we did. Your father passed last winter, and on his deathbed he asked me to find you to apologize for how we treated you. He said it was the biggest regret of his life, turning you away when you needed us most." Felicity stood in the doorway, emotions warring inside her. Part of her wanted to slam the door, to turn away this woman who had abandoned her all those years ago. But another part, the part that had been softened by Samuel's love and the joy of raising her children, felt compassion stirring. "Come in," she said finally, stepping aside. Her mother walked into the house and stopped, looking around at the comfortable, well-loved space. The sound of children playing came from upstairs, and through the window she could see Samuel working with young Samuel in the corral, teaching him how to break a new horse. "You have done well for yourself," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "I am glad. I have worried about you every day since you left." "Then you should have come sooner," Felicity said, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. "You should have reached out. I was your daughter. I needed you and you turned your back on me." "I know," her mother said, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. I was weak. I let your father's pride and the fear of what people would say matter more than my love for you. It was unforgivable." Felicity was quiet for a long moment, looking at this woman who had given her life but had failed her when it mattered most. She thought about holding on to anger, about sending her mother away the way she had been sent away. But then she thought about Samuel and the grace he had shown her, about the second chance he had given her when she desperately needed one. "I forgive you," Felicity said finally. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do not want to carry that anger anymore. Because I have learned that life is too short to hold grudges and too precious to waste on bitterness. I forgive you, Mother, but things cannot go back to the way they were. Too much has changed." Her mother nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry. That I love you. that I am proud of the life you have built." They talked for a while longer, and Felicity introduced her mother to the children, who were shy at first but warmed up when they realized this was their grandmother. When Samuel came in from the corrals, Felicity introduced him to her mother, and she saw the respect in his eyes as he shook her hand, but also the protective way he moved to stand beside Felicity. Her mother left before supper, but she asked if she could visit again, and Felicity said yes. The relationship that developed over the following years was not what it had been when Felicity was a child, but it was something. A tentative connection, a slow rebuilding of trust. Felicity never forgot what had happened, but she made peace with it, and that was enough. As the children grew older and began to make their own way in the world, Felicity and Samuel found themselves with more time alone together. Young Samuel took over more of the ranch work, courting a sweet girl from town and making plans to build his own house on the far side of the property. Sarah was teaching at the schoolhouse in Yarrington and writing poetry in her spare time. The twins were still at home but spent most of their time working the cattle and planning their own futures. On a warm evening in the summer of 1899, Felicity and Samuel sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the years. They were both in their late 30s now, their hair showing threads of gray, their faces marked by the years but also by the laughter and love they had shared. "You ever think about that day we met?" Felicity asked. "About how different our lives could have been if you had not stopped to talk to me." "All the time," Samuel said, taking her hand in his. "I think about how close I came to just walking past you, how I almost decided I did not have time to stop and talk to a stranger. And then I think about everything I would have missed if I had made that choice. This life, these children, you, it makes me believe that some things are meant to be." "I used to think my life was ruined," Felicity said softly. "When my family cast me out, when I was sitting on that bench with nowhere to go, I thought that was the end of everything. But it was really just the beginning. You showed me that mistakes do not have to define us, that there is always hope for a new start if we are brave enough to take it." "You were already brave," Samuel said. "I just gave you a safe place to show it. You are the strongest person I know, Felicity Matthews. You have made me prouder than I can say." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Felicity thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the scared young woman she had been, and the confident mother and wife she had become. She thought about the cowboy who had given her his name and his home, asking nothing in return except the chance to share his life with her. And she thought about the love they had built together, a love that had started as an act of compassion and had grown into something deep and lasting and true. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "Thank you," Samuel replied, "for saying yes, for trusting me, for making me whole again. I love you, Felicity, today and always." As they sat together under the vast Nevada sky, surrounded by the land they had worked and the family they had raised, Felicity knew that she had found something precious and rare. She had found a love that had transformed her life, that had taken her from the depths of despair and lifted her to heights she had never imagined possible. The years continued to unfold, bringing new grandchildren and new joys and the comfortable companionship of a long marriage well lived. Young Samuel and his wife gave them 3 grandchildren, and Sarah eventually married a banker from Carson City and moved there, though she visited often with her own growing family. The twins both married and stayed on the ranch, building houses of their own and continuing the legacy that Samuel and Felicity had started. Clara, their youngest, became a teacher like her sister, dedicated to educating the children of the territory and making a difference in her community. Through it all, Felicity and Samuel remained each other's constant companion and greatest love. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love for each other never diminishing. They sat on their porch in the evenings and remembered the day they met, the life they had built, the children they had raised. On a crisp autumn day in 1915, as they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary, Samuel took Felicity's hand and led her out to the spot where they had first picnicked all those years ago. They were both in their 50s now, grandparents many times over, but when Samuel looked at Felicity, he still saw the brave young woman who had said yes to his improbable proposal. "I have loved you for 33 years, Samuel said, his voice still strong despite his age. "And I would live them all over again, every single day, just to end up right here with you." "I used to think I was cursed," Felicity said, looking out over the ranch that had become her home and her heart. "I thought being cast out by my family was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. But it led me to you. It gave me this life. So maybe it was not a curse at all. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise." "It was definitely a blessing for me," Samuel said, pulling her close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Felicity Matthews, the very best thing." They stood together as the sun set over the Nevada hills. Two people who had found each other when they both needed saving, who had built a life of love and purpose, and meaning from the ashes of loss and shame. Their story had not been an easy one, but it had been theirs, and it had been beautiful in all the ways that mattered. As darkness fell and the stars began to shine, Samuel and Felicity walked hand in hand back to their home, back to the life they had created together. The house was full of warmth and light, with several of their children and grandchildren gathered for the anniversary celebration. There was laughter and conversation, the sound of young voices raised in joy, the smell of good food and the warmth of family surrounding them. Felicity looked around at all of it, at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. She had been given a second chance when she thought all hope was lost, and she had taken that chance and built something extraordinary from it. She caught Samuel's eye across the crowded room, and he smiled at her, that same warm smile that had first made her believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. She smiled back, and in that moment they shared a silent conversation that needed no words. A conversation of love and gratitude and the deep, abiding knowledge that they had been blessed beyond measure. The evening wore on, filled with stories and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a large family gathering. When the last guest had departed and the children had all gone to bed, Felicity and Samuel sat together by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Happy anniversary, my love," Samuel murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Happy anniversary," Felicity replied, closing her eyes and breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and leather and home. "Here is to 33 more years. And beyond," Samuel said softly, "into whatever comes next, you and me together always." "Together always," Felicity echoed, and she knew it was a promise they would keep, no matter what the future held. They had weathered every storm together, had built a life of meaning and purpose and love, and they would continue to do so for all the days they had left. As the fire burned low and the house settled into peaceful quiet around them, Felicity thought one last time about the girl she had been, sitting on that bench in Yarrington with nothing but despair in her heart. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped to help her, who had offered her his name and his home and eventually his heart. She thought about the family they had created, the legacy they were leaving behind, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of it. Every joy, every sorrow, every challenge they had faced together had brought them to this place, to this moment, to this deep and abiding love that had sustained them through 3 decades and would sustain them for however many years they had left. The Wild West had been a hard place, unforgiving and often cruel. But it had also been a place where second chances were possible, where people could reinvent themselves and build new lives from the ruins of their old ones. It had been the place where Felicity Turner had become Felicity Matthews, where a scared young woman had found her strength, her purpose, and her truest love. As sleep began to claim them both, Felicity whispered one last time, "I love you, Samuel Matthews." "I love you too, Felicity Matthews," he replied, his voice warm with contentment. "Forever and always." And in that moment, sitting by the fire in the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well nurtured, they were complete. Two souls who had found each other when they needed it most, who had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and who had created something beautiful and lasting from that choice. Their story was one of redemption and grace, of second chances and hard-won happiness. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, but more than that, it was a story of the transformative power of love, of how one act of kindness could change two lives forever, of how the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures if we were brave enough to keep moving forward. And it was a story that would be told for generations in their family, passed down from grandparent to grandchild, a reminder that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always hope. There was always the possibility of a new beginning. There was always love waiting to be found, if we had the courage to reach for it.